In today's video, I'm going to share some do's and don'ts on how to get more tips from your solo acoustic gigs or from any musical gig for that matter or any performance gig. I'd like to thank one of my subscribers, Noman Dodson, Noman2001, who had left in a comment in a previous video that he would like to see a video about how to increase tipping, and he had some other good suggestions, so I'm probably going to make some more videos and reference him because this was a great idea. And I've been performing for 2.5 decades, and through trial and error and observation, I've learned a little bit about tipping and what you can do to kind of give yourself the edge to hopefully get more tips from customers, fans, clients when you're at a gig. Okay, the first thing that comes to mind, and this is going to seem really, really obvious, but it wasn't really so obvious to me in the beginning, and that is to have a tip cup out or a tip jar or some place where the listener knows that they can come and tip you. Now, you're probably saying to yourself, oh, no duh, of course you have to have a tip cup out. But I don't know, for me, in the early days, I used to feel kind of silly putting a tip cup out. I felt like, I don't know, like I was putting pressure on people to to feel like, you know, I just was like insecure about putting a tip cup out. And for like years, I did not put a tip cup out, and I was just relying on whatever I was getting paid from the venue, from the restaurant, from the bar, from the club, whatever it was. I was relying on them, and that was the only money that I received, and I was happy with that money. But it was a particular friend of mine who, you know, for years would just bust my chops. You know, Frank, why don't you put a tip cup out? Why don't you put a tip cup out? You could be making more money. You know, people want to tip you. That was the thing that didn't get through my head right away. And over time, I would have this awkward thing happen where I'd be playing and people would kind of come up and they'd have like money in their hands and they'd wave it around and look at you and look for a place to put it. And I would kind of like just signal like, well, you know, put it wherever you want. You know, I'm playing. I can't really just stop. And, you know, it was just like an awkward, unnecessary thing. And finally, it just clicked one day. And I said, you know what? People want to tip you. Put a tip cup out and give them the option. And that alone, obviously, just boosted the amount of tips that I got. When you do put a tip cup out, this again may seem obvious, put a couple of dollars in it so that people see it as a tip cup. Going back to what I was saying before I had a tip cup, I would even have people sometimes come up and try to find a place to put the tip, and they would end up putting it in my drink because they would just see a cup and they would assume that was a tip cup, and you know I would have, you know, dollar bills floating in my club soda, you know. So that kind of gave me the security I needed to know that it was probably okay to put out a tip cup. One thing I will say, and I don't do this, if it's a private event and you're getting hired to play a wedding or a party where the customer is not a bar or a restaurant that is serving its own customers, but a private party where it's guests and friends of the host, do not put a tip cup out in situations like that. At the very least, if you feel you want to, ask if it's okay with your client. I personally would never do that. I make sure that I'm getting paid what I want to get paid, and I'm more than comfortable to just do my job, make the party goers happy, and if the client wants to give me a tip, that's up to them. And sometimes you will have guests of the party come up and give you a tip, but that's on them, and that's a different story. Do not put a tip cup out at a private event. Okay, getting back to bars and restaurants. So, put a tip cup out. That's the first and most obvious thing. You might even want to put a little note on it that says tips or thank you with a smiley face. Something so that people kind of subliminally see that they have the option to tip you. Because believe it or not, they want to. But if they don't see a place where they can go do it, they may feel awkward. You know, we're performers. We're used to kind of being up there in front of people. And your average listener isn't. So for them to make that trip forward and try to give you a tip, You want to make it as easy as possible for them to know exactly what to do. Okay? So that's kind of the first thing. What I do is a lot of times I would get to a venue and I'd feel silly asking the bartender for a glass, or the bartender's busy and I have no way to, put a tip cup. So what I started doing is keeping a sleeve of plastic solo cups, clear plastic solo cups, in my car so that I could always throw a couple in my bag. And if I'm at a gig and I can't get a tip cup, I always have at least an emergency tip cup that I could put a couple dollars in, and you've kind of seeded it and you're off to the races. You're ready to start your gig. You have a tip cup out. So keep plastic cups in the car. Now, I'm aware of the fact that in some states, not New York anyway, it's kind of customary in venues where they don't pay you for you to pass a tip cup around, or for you to kind of say, hey, please leave money in the tip cup, that kind of thing. That's a no-no here, I think, in New York. I know some bands that actually have done that, and to me it's very, very awkward. Don't draw unnecessary attention to the fact that you have a tip cup out. To me, it's a turnoff. I've heard customers kind of talk about it. They don't like that pressure. If they want to tip you, they're going to come up and they're going to tip you. Just have a place where they can do it and leave it at that. Worry about engaging with the customers and making them like you, giving them songs that they want to hear, making them feel good. That's your best bet at getting a tip. Another little thing to keep in mind is when somebody does come up and puts a tip in the cup, this should seem obvious, make sure you acknowledge it. If you're playing, you can simply at least look at them and nod, smile. I like to say thank you, even if I have to stop some lyrics. Say thank you. If a child comes up and puts a tip in the cup, always smile and thank a child. Show them that you appreciate the fact that they did it, and then take a look around the room to see who sent that child over, and make sure you give a nod of thank you to the parents or the older person who's with that child, who more than likely is the one that gave them the money to give to you. Always show gratitude. And no matter what the tip is, show gratitude as if it's the greatest tip in the world. Okay, you don't have to overreact, but I've heard of musicians, these are stories that I've heard from customers, where a musician will look at the little tip and roll their eyes because it's $1 or 50 cents. You should be grateful for any person that decided to go into their own pocket, who didn't have to, and hand you money to show appreciation for the fact that they are enjoying your music. So whether it's $1 or whether it's $20, it's a tip. Imagine if you're playing in a place with 150 people, if every one of those people gave you $2, well, that's $300. So never put your nose up because the tip is small. You don't know what that person's financial situation is, and it's generous of them to give you any tip at all. And I've heard of musicians like bitching to their friends, this place isn't tipping well, and that can be overheard by customers, and that gets around. You don't want to seem like a spoiled sport. Sometimes you play a venue and everybody's loving you and you think you're going to make a lot of tips, and you walk out of there with very few. And sometimes you're playing a venue that you're like, oh man, this is going to be really weird, nobody seems to be liking it, and you walk out with more tips than you've ever made. I've had it happen. So go in with a good feeling, go in with a positive vibe, do your job, do what you're there to do. The tips are just a bonus. Another thing nowadays, what you want to do is if you have a Venmo or a Cash App, have the square code presented on your tip cup, on your music stand. You could even have it on your instrument, because a lot of people don't carry cash nowadays. So they may come up with their phone and try to tip you. And I've had this happen to me, where they'll say, well, do you have Venmo? And I literally have to stop and tell them what my Venmo is. And now we're messing with cell phones, which is kind of awkward. Or sometimes I'll just say to them, don't worry about it, because I know I don't have time to start going over my Venmo app with them. And I learned to just have a Venmo code or a pay code so that they could just scan it with their phone, especially the younger generation. This is what they're used to doing. So have a Venmo code attached to your tip cup or on your music stand. For that matter, you could even have a square code for them to follow your Instagram account or just about anything else you want to have people do. There is a code for it. So have that. It'll help you make more tips. Another way to ensure that you get more tips is if you're playing in a venue like where you repeatedly play there and you start to know the customers, they'll make requests. And if you learn the songs that your customers like, you'll find that they really, really appreciate that, and usually they will repay you in the form of tips. That's how they show their gratitude. So if somebody comes up to you in a particular week and asks you if you know a song and you don't know it, you know what? Go home and learn that song. And the next time you see that customer, play that song, and you will notice they will make eye contact with you more often than not. And that type of appreciation goes a long way. And that's how you build out your customer base. And you build loyal customers, and you build customers that want to tip you. Another thing I found is you tend to make, now you might not be able to control this aspect of it, but I find you tend to make more tips in a restaurant when you're sitting near the door. All right. Now maybe this isn't really for good reasons. I think customers kind of sometimes feel if they've enjoyed your music all night and they have to walk past you to leave. I don't know if it's that they feel bad. I just think that, let's say you're in a corner somewhere, out of sight, out of mind. They're not really seeing you, so they're not thinking to tip you. They're not walking around necessarily all night thinking about you. It's not about you. I know we like to think that it is as musicians, but it's not. So if you're sitting in the far corner of the bar and the customer's on the other side, they might not even be hearing you that well. And even if they are, they might not even be registering that you're over in some corner playing. And therefore, you're probably not going to get tipped unless the customer is really, really motivated to do so. And most customers just aren't. But if you sit near the door and they walk past you, it's going to occur to them like, oh, this is the person we've been listening to all night. We loved it. Let's give them a tip. Or, quite frankly, they might actually feel a little silly for walking past you and not leaving you a tip. I don't know if that's good or bad, but I find you make more tips when you sit near a door. I don't know, take that for what it is. Another thing you can do is if you find that you're in an area of the restaurant or the bar where you kind of can't be seen because you're like tucked in a corner, I like to sit on a stool when I play, but I've also found that if I'm standing, it gives you a little more visibility where you could make more of a connection to the audience. You'll tend to get more tips that way. I don't necessarily do it because I'm not, it's not my main concern to try to squeeze as much tips as I can out of it. I just like to, do certain things which will give you a higher probability of getting tips. But I'm not going to stand if I don't really feel like standing just so that I could maybe get more tips. Sometimes it just doesn't work out that way, and it is what it is. And one final way that you could let people know that they can tip you without drawing unnecessary attention or without asking for tips is to just say thank you on the microphone for the tips that you've gotten. When you finish a song and people clap, you could, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, and I do appreciate the generous tips that you've been leaving. Thank you so much. That's all. You're gently letting them know that you appreciate the fact that they have left you tips. And for those that weren't thinking about it before, maybe now they will say, oh, you know what? I could leave this person a tip. And that's your way of not asking for tips, but letting people know that they can leave you a tip if they want. Well, I hope you found some use for this video. I hope you'll give me a thumbs up, like, and subscribe. And if you have any tips that you'd like to share with the rest of us on getting tips, please feel free to put some comments in the box below and let me know, let everyone else know what your secret is. How do you get those tips from the customers, okay? I'm Frank Persico. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you found some use in it. And I will see you in the next video. Take care.